Good afternoon, and our question is how to raise local awareness on the unique values of world heritage. We had 3 case studies to illustrate this issue. The first case study was from Mozambique, on the island of Mozambique, and it basically focused on the issue of management planning and how the local communities were involved at various levels, and particularly the issue of how the retroactive OUV was then formulated based on incorporating the local values. The second case study was from Slovenia, and it basically focused on, again, the incorporation of local communities in making them aware of the OUV of the site, particularly the issue of the youth and how these have been incorporated into the process. There was also the issue of making sure that the community itself is engaged in some kind of activity, and there was a calendar of activities where the community would then be engaged to make sure that they are aware of World Heritage status. And then the last case study was from Spain, Avila, World Heritage Site, and this one focused mainly on the youth, particularly in schools, and the use of World Heritage in young hands, and making sure that the school kids in the town are very much well versed on the World Heritage concepts. It was not just about their community or their site. They also learned about other sites, which I thought was a very good indication of awareness of World Heritage sites. Now, we then went on to look at some of the highlights, what was coming out of the 3 case studies. We also had another case study, which is not here, which was from Algeria, but again it focused on education as well. The issues which came out were, the first one was to encourage schools to use the educational programs. We thought that particularly the 2 programs, one from Spain and from Slovenia, did highlight very good projects which could be carried forward to make sure that young kids can be part and parcel of the World Heritage Site. Since they are the future, we thought that these were good programs, and in fact, particularly the Spanish one, we thought it could be emulated in other countries, funds permitting. And also, there was also the discussion on the fact that UNESCO has this World Heritage in Young Hands kit, which most countries don't seem to be taking advantage of, and perhaps we could encourage countries to do so. The second issue was creating a dialogue between the generations, both ways, in intergenerational mix, if you want, particularly within the local community. Again, emphasizing the whole issue of the youth, so that they are the future, and there must be a dialogue with the current generations who know what these World Heritage Sites are about, and we should make sure that that information is passed on. There was also the issue of incorporating local values into the OUV, particularly for new nominations. Everyone recognizes the fact that the old nominations, you cannot change the OUV. It's already cast in stone. But for the new sites, the discussion was that we will protect these sites much better if the OUV also took into consideration the local values. In other words, it's also incorporated in what is going to be protected rather than just OUV values. Now, the fourth point is more or less similar to the second point, making sure of continuity of knowledge and skills. But also there was a discussion on not just the youth and local community, but that the politicians were very important in the work we do. And if we are going to make awareness, then I think we should also aim not just at the local communities, but at the politicians. I think some people say that, well, if you aim at the local communities, then perhaps the politicians will also listen much better because they require the votes from them. We also discussed the fact that from the case studies which were presented, there was an element of passion from the people who were driving the projects. And we thought that this should be encouraged as much as possible so that they continue to build on what they've been doing. These were the main issues, but we then started to look at some recommendations, and all of them are not written here, but the first one was the whole issue of universal values, that they are generally set on the basis of local values, and therefore we should make sure that the local values are protected. The second issue, which was again related to the topic which we were working on, awareness, was the incorporation of heritage into the curriculum. And the discussion was that maybe this is something which is very difficult to do, but we should encourage the projects which are going on rather than trying to influence the curriculum. Teachers usually are very resistant to new subjects being imposed on the curriculum. The third point was the issue of, again, involving communities in the nomination process as well as the management of sites in order to show respect for indigenous knowledge and issues like that. I think then the last issue from the recommendations was the emphasizing the idea of a dialogue, to make sure that there is a dialogue between the experts, the local community, and the community. I think those were the main issues which we discussed. I don't know whether Beata have left anything out, but I think those were the major issues which we looked at. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I know you all are saying, oh no, not this guy again. I'm sorry. I was the very fortunate moderator of Group 2. The title of the Group 2 session was How to Involve Local Communities in the Nomination Process for World Heritage Properties. We had the good fortune to listen to 3 very interesting case studies. The first being Fort Jesus and the Old Town of Mombasa in Kenya, which I actually have a vested interest in myself, so I'm a stakeholder there, sort of. The second case study was the Kos and Cévennes Mediterranean agro-pastoral landscape in France. And the third one was a case study actually looking at 2 sites in Australia, one of them which is a World Heritage Site, the Kakadu, and another which is not a World Heritage Site yet, and maybe is a long way from becoming a World Heritage Site, but which is maybe starting on the process at this point in time. And given the fact that the theme was on nominations, that provided an interesting perspective. The name of that site is Cape York, I should mention. And I would like to thank all 3 of the presenters of the session, and also the group, because there were some very interesting aspects that came out of our discussions. And I will get right to them. So, conclusion number one is, which came out actually very strongly in all three of the presentations, was that the involvement of local communities is not something that should begin when you begin the nomination process. You should actually begin working with communities, or communities should be a part of heritage processes long before the idea of World Heritage nomination is even contemplated. That the process is an integral part of understanding heritage sites in general, and as such should already be in place when the nomination process begins. Now, I know that's easy to say, but we're talking about World Heritage, but nevertheless, in all of the cases that we talked about, be it for Jesus, which wasn't inscribed until actually last year, but which community involvement processes began in the early 1990s, actually, so 20 years ago. The case in France also, the same thing. They became a national park and a biosphere reserve long before they got to the point where they were looking at a World Heritage nomination. And now this case in Australia, this new one, not Kakadu, although there were some consultation processes before, but still, they're starting it now, long before they begin discussing World Heritage. And we thought that that's an important point to highlight. That World Heritage is just sort of one point along a process that should begin long before. The second point, and this is a bit of a long one, but that is that communities are complicated and diverse and should be identified in their complexity. And I will actually go back to Gustavo's question, because it's true, I'm a heritage expert, it is true, and I work for an advisory body, that is true, but I also do live in a World Heritage site, so I am actually a community member for that particular World Heritage site. And on any given World Heritage site, there are many people wearing many different hats. They are residents, maybe they're business owners, maybe they're both residents and business owners, you know, maybe they belong to a religious group or another religious group. There are all sorts of complexities to what a community or communities, and again, the use of the plural here, are, and we need to recognize that, and we need to be able to take that into account. And therefore, we need to develop mechanisms that are meaningful for participation for all of these different communities, and that those should be put in place at the earliest moments, starting with tentative listing and on into the nomination process, and obviously based on what I said already in point number one. They should already be based on existing processes where possible. That communities should be involved in initial research about the site, in identifying the outstanding universal value, and also any other values, local values, national values, whatever values those might be. And that they should also be involved in the evolution of the management plan and or management system. So, to sum up, a system of meaningful dialogue and decision-making must be put into place, which is based on the principle of, and this comes from Bill Logan, who presented the Australian case study, on free, prior, and informed consent of the local communities. And the other point that I wanted to make here before going on to the next point was one of our presentations actually talked about even the use of words, coming to some sort of an understanding, and that sometimes the desires, let's say, of the local community or communities may be actually very similar to those of the heritage managers, but sometimes we're actually using different words to express those things. And so another thing that we need to do is we need to work through that, and we need to come to common understandings, but recognizing the diversities of language and the way language is used, and we need to think about the words that we use, essentially. Point number 3 was that situations may arise where there are difficulties in identifying local communities, and therefore the systems should be flexible enough to take into account that communities may come forward well into the process. In this case, mechanisms should exist for ensuring an adequate consultation, even when groups are coming in later in the process. Actually, this was only a brief point in our discussions, but the idea being that sometimes state parties actually think that they are communicating with a community and getting the consent of the community, but then at a certain point in time in the process, sometimes very late in the process, another group comes forward and says, well, but I'm also the community, I'm part of this community, and you didn't consult with me. So we need to make sure that we're flexible enough and that we can take those kinds of things into account as we move forward. The fourth point is that local communities must be recognized as the key actors in the process of conservation, maintenance, and keeping alive World Heritage properties. If we recognize that most or all heritage is living in one way or another, we need to recognize that those people working, living, being a part of those communities should be recognized as the key actors, and not the heritage managers necessarily, but the communities. The fifth is related to sustainable management, and that sustainable management of our World Heritage properties begins during the nomination process. That benefits to the local community should be based on sustainable protection of the property, as well as economic benefits, but also other, it's not written up here, but also social benefits and protection of the environment, for example, all of the aspects of sustainable development and protection. And that we need to recognize those, we need to recognize that the protection of the OUV and other important values to local communities need to be incorporated in this thing that we call benefit to the local community. The benefit to the local community isn't just the economic benefit, it's actually all of the benefits that come together to add value to the community, and we need to recognize all of those. And finally, the last thing that we talked about was a more practical one, maybe, which is that the operational guidelines themselves should be revised to more strongly insist on the involvement of local communities in the nomination process, and subsequently in the protection and management of the property. Advisory bodies should be asked by the World Heritage Committee to systematically ascertain the involvement of local communities in the nomination process and in the management plans and subsequent management of the property once it is inscribed. And this is my own invention, actually. I don't want to ascribe this to the group, but I added a potential for how it can be revised based on the original wording, which is in the operational guidelines now, which you see, which is that state parties are encouraged to prepare nominations with participation of a wide variety of stakeholders, of which the local community is one. But it's only encouraged, and it's impossible for state parties to do as they wish in that case. So we could theoretically revise that to actually say that state parties are required to prepare nominations, et cetera, with all the parties, and further that state parties are required to demonstrate free, prior, and informed consent by local communities at the time of inscription of properties on the World Heritage List. Now, this is not something that's in the convention, obviously. This is something that would be in the operational guidelines. Furthermore, it's something that the state parties themselves would have to agree to, because any changes in the operational guidelines have to be voted on by the committee. So 21 state parties would actually need to agree to modify the operational guidelines to include this wording, or something similar. But in any event, it doesn't hurt to propose it. And let's see whether we can actually get the 21, or at least the majority of the 21. I guess we would need two-thirds majority of the 21, whatever that is, in order to change the operational guidelines. But it would certainly be interesting to at least put this forward as a possibility. Okay, so with that, I would like to close. I would like to thank again everyone in the group. I would like to thank all of you for listening, and I hope this has been useful. And I hope our discussion is useful to the larger plenary in some way. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I have the responsibility to share with you the passionate debates and discussions that we had in our group. I must admit that at the end I had to force everyone to stop. So you can just imagine how intense were the discussions. So in this group, in our group, of course, the question was, we wanted to answer directly to the questions. How and why do some communities succeed in using World Heritage as a World Heritage? To secure local benefit from the World Heritage status. So, how communities succeed in using World Heritage status as a driver for sustainable development? We had 3 case studies. A combined one from Uganda on the Bwindi Impenetrable National Park and the Rwenzori National Park. And we had a second case study on the Ilulissat Ishfjord from Greenland, and another case study on the high coast Balkan archipelago, Sweden. First of all, I would like to say that, you know, having listened to this presentation, what was interesting is that we just wanted to go and see the sites. And I don't know if it will be one of the report, it will be encapsulated in the report, but it's important because that's also the strengths and of sharing case studies and experience, learning from each other. What came out from different presentations is also interesting. First of all, it confirmed what was said this morning about the fact that community is a complex issue. So then the group, you know, decided to remain to the concept of local community as it was already discussed in the morning. On the how to secure local benefit. Just quickly to tell you that in the Uganda cases, Bwindi and the Rwenzori, the issue of revenue sharing scheme was mentioned, which became as an important issue. The issue of creating tourism-related opportunities for communities, promotion of cultural resources, and protection of cultural identities and values came quite strongly. On the other one on Greenland, a very interesting case, which was presented by Naya. What was also interesting is that, you know, when you invest for tourism purposes or for conservation purposes, you do not only invest for this, but you also have to do it for communities, so that, you know, this investment are shared. And of course, on the last presentation, which was the results of a survey presented, what came out strongly was the fact that, you know, when you speak about local benefit, you don't speak about economic benefit, you also speak about social sustainability. We also discussed the why, which was important. I don't want to go into this in detail, but I just want to recall some of the few things that came, you know, like it is important to maintain good relations with the communities. We will never succeed without the communities. Community gives its agreement support to World Heritage nomination, so it's bloody necessary. I'm just picking up some of the important things that came from it. It's bloody necessary, so we have no choice. It's just bloody necessary. So I like the words. We then came out with a number of recommendations, which I'd like now to share with you. The first one, of course, how to do it, then it brings us to the issue of capacity building. Capacity building on issues related to, you know, local communities, because it should drive just the process on how we can understand and appreciate, you know, community benefits, the possibilities, the expectation. And what was interesting here, and what is interesting to recall, is the fact that, you know, we are all, so we speak about us, you know, for both us and them. That's from the communities to what we are, I mean, those who are the experts, and also on the other way around. So this capacity building process is absolutely necessary and important. The second recommendation, and of course, it's on the need to establish the mechanism for improved data collection, indicators, and research. And this is really to allow, establish, baselines and also define, the limit of acceptable changes. So there's already enough that it's important to recognize that there is a need to balance, but what are the limits of acceptable changes? But not only for the communities, but with the communities and with the local communities. So this was the second recommendation. The third recommendation is on the need to reassess expectation from the global versus the local levels. How do we assess it? It's important that communities' interest and the word rights and obligation is here also very important. How and do we, consider all these things without prejudice to the World Heritage status? And how the operational guidelines itself can be informed by the need to reconcile community expectation with the expectation related to World Heritage status. These are important questions that needs to also, the group wanted to, they discuss it really in detail, and we were just trying to summarize. The fourth recommendation, it's of course on the fact that it is important to consider that local benefit have more dimension than only the economical aspect. So we should then ensure social sustainability throughout the process of the recognition of properties and management of OUV. Group 2, I see, spoke quite clearly about that one. So in this process, the issue of the nomination process is also included. But then after that, the management of the outstanding universal value. And then the group also discussed the issue of the twinning itself, because the discussion was built on what we learned from this experience. And it was important to really commend the twinning as a source of new information experience sharing and a tool for awareness building. But also encourage it, not only between regions, but also interregionally, because it's really an opportunity for people to share experience and discuss why and how some communities they succeed or some fails in realizing the potential benefits of the World Heritage status. So this training, it's really important and it must be encouraged. And of course, the last one, which is really to my heart, is that this conference, it's a starting point, but also a continuation of this close cooperation and mutual learning process between all the regions of the world. And I think there is an opportunity. I just wanted to mention here the opportunity of the launching of the periodic reporting of Africa, which will be for the next 6 years. And this could be, an opportunity, because this action plan, really gives priority to community issues. And it could be an opportunity for future collaboration and partnership between, and this is important, not only state parties, but also, the family, the big family, the biggest family of experts, but also friends, because I'm sure that, living tomorrow here, we will not be expert. I think we will be a big network with good friends. We shared so many things together. So these are some of these, the 6 recommendations that came from the group. Thank you.
Well, the fourth and the last session, but nonetheless a very important issue about traditional management systems. As the other sessions, we also had 3 introductions of 3 cases. The first one was from Kasubi Toms in Uganda, presented by Sebastian and Jonathan. We had a presentation from the Vega archipelago by Rita. And we also had a presentation from, I'm sorry Susanna, but my pronunciation is not very good, but Sunniva, sorry. Tjavjegadje, Mortensnes, a site that is not yet on the list in northern Norway. We had discussions that I think overlapped partly with the other 3 sessions, or the themes for the other 3 sessions. We discussed a little bit about awareness, we discussed a little bit about the nomination processes, but we've tried to pin it down to what was relevant for our discussion, or the session theme. I think this is a mixture of some observations, some suggestions, some challenges, and also some recommendations, so please consider it as that. The first thing we wanted to pinpoint was the importance of the role played by women, as we considered it to be a tendency that women are often forgotten when it comes to traditional management systems, or not given the right priority at least. We also discussed the role of entrepreneurs and drivers as extremely important in the role of sustainable traditional management systems. The third point we wanted to highlight is the importance of continuous focus on education and involvement of the youth. We've discussed that in several occasions during this conference already, but we also consider this to be extremely important in considering the traditional management systems, and also in creating incentives, as Rita took up the importance of giving the youth incentives to move back to the islands and to work with the eiderduck production. Well, we also discussed the importance of the role of traditional management systems in sustainable development, as lessons learned from heritage sites can give a vital contribution to sustainable development. Another point that we discussed was the importance of the state party having the sensitivity to respect traditional management systems. And again, the role of local organizations in the dialogue between local communities, and I think also in the role of coordinating the local communities and the local regional authorities, and in sustaining the traditional management systems. And finally, a theme related to traditional management systems as not being static. They're in a constant development or constant dynamic processes. In that, we found it right to highlight 2 points. That is the importance of finding the right balance regarding change, as a lot of sites has always been in change, and we don't want them to be a frozen picture from one period or from one certain year, but find solutions that will make it possible let them be in the constant dynamic processes. And finally, documentation of traditional management systems may cause problems in that we as experts are creating truths. And in that, the importance of having sensitivity in selecting methods used for extracting and documenting those traditional management systems. Thank you.